Baba knows the way. For Joseph Baba Ifa, Baba knows the way. We follow the signs. He walks with the Orisha through sacred lines. He speaks with the ancients. He honors the drum. He carries the wisdom where we all come from.
Hey family, thank you for tuning into Our Roots podcast with Joseph Baba Ifa. We're only the strongest roots, see the light, brought to you by Botaniga Candles and more. If you haven't had the opportunity, hit that subscribe button. What's up, Phil?
Hey, happy Sunday.
I love the horns, the sound of the horns.
Yes, sound of the horns. How's it going, man?
Everything's good, man. Another great week in the book. Another great week in the books.
The hat is still on your head. Have you taken it off since you've been here?
No, I never take the hat off.
Well, it looks good though.
Thank you.
Still looks good, man. But yeah, man, today's Sunday. Happy everybody's here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I know everybody loves to keep this channel for themselves, but for us to grow, you got to share it, baby.
Share it,
don't forget to share
Comparte.
it. But if you want to join our exclusive club, you can, right? We should name it something, you know? I think we should call it something. We need to name it.
The Our Roots podcast membership program.
I don't know, but if you guys had ideas, drop in the comments.
Yeah. What should we call the membership program?
We'll pick something else. Yeah, so you can join our membership program. Click that button directly under the video, and it gives you access. We got 3 separate tiers, each tier offering its own different perks, whether it's extra episodes, early podcast release shows, discounts on merch. I think I said it already, but you get tons of fun. So yeah, so what are we talking about today, bro?
Today we're going to be going over where do I put my Orishas, right? So a lot of people, they reach out. Everybody has a different living situation, right? And I commend everybody who's willing to accommodate their life to Orisha, because it's not always an easy task. Where you have other spiritualities where you leave for worship, or you visit, a place, a sacred place. When you accept Ifa and Orisha into your life, your home becomes your temple. You know, you're bringing your icons home. They're living with you. You're rubbing shoulders every day. So a lot of people, they're either, having their own place, or maybe they're living with somebody, or, they have limited space and whatnot, or maybe they have their own home and they're like, where do each of these things go? It's been a pretty frequent question, so we decided to come out with a video, where do I put my Orishas, or where do my Orishas go? And the one that has been sparking the most controversy as of late is Eshu, right? Everybody's like, Baba, where do we put Eshu? And you're going to hear so many different things. You're going to hear behind the front door, outside at the front door, the garage, the back patio, the bush, whatever. We're just going to go over some Odus and start with Eshu. And ultimately, this translates to the warriors as well, being that these guys were kind of always together. So there's an Odu known as Obaraobe, right? And in Obaraobe, Orumila had visited a land to be able to consult them. They had some situations, and the Odu of Obaraobe Lantosi was revealed, where Ifa said they needed to perform Ebo, right? And when they performed the Ebo, the issues were basically resolved, right? So Orumila said, on top of the Ebo you guys just did, you have to perform another one to be able to solidify the effects. Now, at that point, people became suspicious of Orula. They were a little bit frugal, and they said, hey, Orula, don't try to scam us out of a couple $100 more. We're not doing the second Ebo, so you can keep it pushing. And he was like, okay, thank you. And he left. So the Ebo that they did, the first one, was to be left at the entrance of where they lived, right? So these 3 passerbys come by, and they introduce themselves as Eleguau Gung and Ochosi. And they said, what offerings do you guys leave? We're deities, we're Orishas, and they were like, oh, there's an Ebo there at the entrance. But when they looked in the Ebo, it was rotten because it was old, which is the reason why Orumila said, hey, you have to do a fresh one, because, nobody knew that the warriors were showing up other than Ifa. So that's why there's always an aspect of blind faith. So based on being offered rotten materials, they took insult to it, and they said, yo, from this point forward, nothing moves. Nothing comes in or out of here, right? So Ogun would be the executioner, Ochosi would keep watch, and Elegua would be the doorman into the village. So basically, people had to concoct this plot to try to escape or draw Orula back. Orula ended up, in some versions, somebody went looking for him. In another version, he had done the lap around the world and ended up back where he started. And you know, when he got back, people were like, please do it, Bo, and read us and things like that. And Obaraobe came out again, where Ifa said they needed to perform a fresh Ebo. And there's multiple versions of the Ebo where sometimes it takes a rooster. The main focus was the Eko, right? And when they made the fresh offering to the warriors, you know, Elegua and Ogun Ochosi recognized Orula, and they looked at the people and they said the only guy who could recommend one Ebo after another is Ifa, right? So how does this all apply to the position or location of Eshu and ultimately the warriors? If you notice, they were posted at the entrance of the village. So they would see everybody that would come in and everybody that would leave. And the reason being is it was a checkpoint system. It was almost like a bouncer concept where, you know, nobody can come in that we don't want and nothing can leave that we want to stay. So that's why Eshu has always ultimately been identified with the entrances of things. Now, the question is, do we leave him inside or do we leave him outside? And ultimately, that's at y'all's discretion. Not everybody has the luxury of being able to have their Eshu shrine right outside their front door. Sometimes we live in neighborhoods that have HOAs, which are like little mafias in themselves. Yo,
Definitely.
Dog, when you see the amount of pull that a HOA has, oh man, forget about it. That's the machine.
Do you have one in your neighborhood?
Nah, dog. I live in the woods right now. So, but I tell you, sometimes it's not the HOA. Sometimes it's the county. Sometimes it's the city. Like, there's so many levels of government, and they're all pretty monotonous. So, but yeah. So you might have a HOA. You might have a nosy neighbor. You know, any of these things, and you might just want to maintain your privacy. It's okay to leave Eshu as near to the front door as possible. Ideally, he would be outside, because if you look at the story from Obaraobe, the warriors were outside. They were the watchmen. Bro, and I thank God for my childhood, because it was such good cinematography. Do you remember the movie Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls?
That was the sequel, right?
That was not the one in Miami. That was the one over there in Africa.
Okay.
Do you remember when he's I forgot what he was doing in the village, like he was, you know, snooping around, and they had a baboon on on security duty. You remember? And
I don't remember. Oh man, why can't I remember this?
I don't know, but I think he gave the baboon some alcohol or whatever, and the baboon fell asleep. I don't know. I think he was trying to get into the shikaka cage, you know, where the bat was.
Okay.
But that's kind of like the concept with Eshu. He was the watchman. You know what I'm saying? He was outside, you know. And you have to imagine, you have villages and things like that. We're talking about ancient Africa. The security was outside, you know. But neither here nor there. I mean, we've been able to accommodate and things like that. Some people become very, you know, very fine with their points and things like that, and they're real sticklers. But, you know, ultimately life dictates our actions. So if you have them on the inside, that's okay too. There's another Odu that actually touches on this as well, and it's the Odu Osalafobeyo. And in this Odu, it speaks of the Eshu of two faces, right? Some people have him as Eshu Ijelu. He has various names there. You have Agrielu and all these, but it's ultimately Eshu Ijelu. And then you have Eshu Ni in the Odu of Obetumako, which these are the two-faced Eshus, amongst others, but the two most popular ones based on Odu. And the reason that Eshu has two faces is because it can see who's coming in and it can see who's leaving without having to turn around. It's kind of like the mayor from The Nightmare Before Christmas. But that's why Eshu ultimately lives as close to the door or entrance of wherever we are, because he's always watching, right? So those are the two versions. Now, the reason Eshu leans more towards being outside, you can cite Odus like Otruponka, Okana Trupon, or Otruponkana, where, you know, like in the Odu of Otruponka, you know, and I think there's also a very similar pataki in the Odu of Ogundadio, was where Obatala was trying to confection a house, right? And Eshu didn't help. He was a little bit lazy. So Obatala was like, well, being that you didn't help build the house, you can sleep outside. There's another version where Eshu was disrupting the home and, you know, having issues with Obatala's kids. And he's like, hey, those are my kids. Now you can live outside. And then, you know, like in the Odu Okana Trupon and Otruponkana was where Eshu would make fun of Obatala and cause mischief in his house when he wasn't there. And when Obatala, you know, saw what was going on, he said, well, now you can live outside. So there's so many patakis that speak of Eshu living outside, right? But once again, it's all mitigated by our living situation. And then you look at Odus like the Odu of Obeate, where it speaks of when Yemaya was the warrior, the mother of the warriors, right? of Elegua, Ogun, and Ochosi. When Ochosi disobeyed her and went to live in the jungle with Osaing and learn witchcraft and things like that, when Elegua and Ogun tried to bring him back into the house, Yemaya was like, I don't want him here because he's disobedient. So Elegua and Ogun said, well, if he can't live here, we won't live here, and we'll live wherever he lives. And they all went to live in the jungle, right? So once again, another Odu that states why, ideally, the same way Eshu lives outside the warriors as well. Because, for example, that story of Obeate explains perfectly why Ochosi preferred to be outside. Even in the Odu of Osabara, it speaks of when Ochosi had a hut, but he was hardly ever home. He was always in the jungle, hunting birds or, performing his spiritual work. And then you look at Orishas like Ogun. They say that when Ogun descended from heaven, whether it was his celestial travel leading the Orishas through the cosmos to earth, or from heaven to earth, like the ground, he descended into the jungle. Ogun, never really assimilated the home. So when he descended in Ogun Namei into the jungle and the machete was manifested, immediately he made those conditions for himself. Then if you look in Odus like Ogun Namei, once again, the same Odu, was where he actually went to war with Orisha Ile. A lot of people don't realize that, there's certain spaces in nature that they themselves are energies, and one of them is the house. Like there's actually an Orisha known as Ile, and it's in the Odu of Ogun Nameji, and who went to war with Ile was Ogun and Olokun in the feminine aspect. And they tried to destroy Ile, but being that Ile had done a bowl with Orumila, she was able to withstand all of the forces of nature that Ogun represented, which was like the iron and the tools and the foliage, and then that Olokun represented, which was all the maritime disasters like typhoons, tsunamis, and all those things. So Ogun, never assimilated the home. There are versions of that Pataki, though, that when they lost the battle, Ogun kind of looked and was like, oh, maybe, I should have a home as well. And they say that he and Olokun, once again, because Olokun does have feminine paths as well, we really don't know what, they are from a pronoun standpoint. But, in this case, it was a woman, and Ogun started a relationship with her, and they say that from that, all of the other Orishas manifested, right, primordially. The Odu Ogun Nameji also speaks of why, in the Lukumi tradition, we always have a counterpart Orisha, right? So, for example, I'm an initiate of Oshun, but my counterpart energy would be masculine, and, in my case, it's the Orisha Gayu, is my father. So, it's the same thing with everybody else in our tradition, but that's one of the few cases where it shows kind of like a duality, where Ogun, had beef with Ile because he felt like she was infringing, but at the same time, he was like, well, maybe I need a house as well, being that I'm trying to enter into a different space of life. And if we look at the Odu of Ogunda Leni, when we literally translate that, it's Ogunda Ileni, which means Ogun created a house to live in, right? Where Ogun was kind of tired of the jungle, and he said, I need conditions to be able to, propagate my business. Originally he was a hunter, and he would kind of just fall asleep under a tree and keep it moving. But after a while, he's like, I want a woman, I want a family, I want children, and I can't have them sleeping outside under the trees. At that point, he performed divination, or had it done on his behalf. Ogun Naleni was revealed. He performed Ebo, and with the materials, he basically became the first contractor, and started building homes and things like that. And it became very lucrative for him. But when you look at the concept, kind of like of Ogun or the warriors, they have a house, but they don't have a house. Like, they have shrines, right? So, like, for example, the shrine is known as the Didi, right? Or the Didi Eshu, which is where you meet Eshu, or you have the space of Ogun. Like, you'll hear also the word Ojubo, which makes reference to like altars and things like that. But the Didi is really what it's referring to more than anything, like the shrine. So it's like a house, but it's not a house. Like, it'll have some leaves and things like that, but it's still outside. And there's various Orishas that live outside that we'll get into little by little. But you see the duality where it's kind of like, hey, if you need to have them inside, it's okay. But if you can have them outside, that's great. Because, we're talking about energies that really just, we're outside. One of the only Orishas that was innately and always in a home was Orumila. And we actually touched on this Padaki in the Odu of Babao Yekum Meji, the video that we came out with, where when the Orishas performed celestial divination and ebo with the Odu of Baba Ifa Meji, when they arrived or were going to be departing, they were told not to run. They were told to make sure that their first steps on earth were at a pace and with cadence. But the issue is, you know, when we perform ebo, and the Odu of Bewenye actually speaks of this. We just went over that in this video. When we perform ebo, it tends to cause climatic changes leaning towards, you know, perspiration or ultimately, you know, rain, right? And when they arrived on Earth, the other Orishas actually hadn't performed ebo. Who did was Orumila. So when they arrived on Earth, all of the Orishas started running in the rain because they didn't want to get wet. So, for example, Eshu went to the four corners or he went to the woods. Ogun and Ochosi the same thing. Ochung to the river. Chango to the palm tree. The only Orisha that arrived on Earth and didn't allow himself to run in the rain, which is actually one of the taboos for the Iyawo, running or being in the rain, ironically, you know, he walked. And based on him walking rather than, you know, running around in a scurry, he was able to actually find a house. And the house had a light, and he arrived at the door and he said, "Hey, my name's Orumila. I'm an Orisha. I just descended from heaven. You know, I'm just looking for a place to stay dry." You know, and they welcomed him in and they said, "Hey, what do you know how to do?" He said, "Well, I performed divination. I have an icon that's really great for thwarting death." And they were like, "Yeah, sure, please. Here's a bath. Here's some food. Here's some clothing, but we want you to stay." And he said, "All right, I'll stay. As long as you feed me, clothe me, and, you know, make sure I'm hygienic, I'll stay." Until this day, Orumila is still in the house. He's still in the home. You know, we feed him, we make offerings to him, you know, we attend to him, and we make sure his shrine is clean, all of these different things. So he's actually the only Orisha that innately, you know, is in the house. There is no case where Orumila is necessarily attended to outside of the house. Everything of Ifa, whether it's an ita, a ceremony, all of these different things, is within a space. Even in, you know, Isheshe land or Yoruba land or with Isheshe practice, even the Ibo or the Ibodu is housed in a way where it's still a domicile. So Orumila and Ile are completely integrated and inseparable, you know. And going back to Ogun real quick before we move on to Osun, you know, when you look at the Odu, I believe it was Okanatrupon where Ogun sent his kids to, you know, basically assassinate Orula. You know, when they went into Orula's house and burglarized it and they fell on their own knives and died, Ogun, when he saw that scene, he got so scared he abandoned the house and went back into the jungle, and Orumila acquired his property. So, you know, there's various points, but, you know, specifically with Eshu and the warriors, ideally they're outside, but if they are inside, based on these patakis, you want them as close to the door as possible so they can perform their function, right? Or if they have their own shrines, they'll be able to, you know, perform their functions as well. So, mind you, now, when we talk about the warriors, in my humble opinion, Osun technically isn't a warrior deity. He's really, more than anything, the staff of Orumila. So there's various Odus that speak of, you know, Osun's position, or Opa Osun, as he's really formally known. And we may have gone over some of these in his video. But when you look at the Odu of Irete Lasso, or Irete Lasun, which literally means Irete is where Osun arrived, Osun lived with Orumila, always. They were inseparable. And this is also in the Odu of Ikar Osun as well, where Osun became the property of Ifa, and Orumila attended to him. Or in the Odu of Ober Osun as well, in Eyobe, it speaks of Orumila being the personal attendant of the Opa Osun staff, Irosomei as well. We'll get into that pataki even more because it has a great learning point. But in Irete Lasun was where Osun lived with Orumila. And they actually lived inside the house. And they had an apartment on a second floor. Orula had generated some envy from a neighbor downstairs, where they actually decided to light the building on fire to be able to burn Orumila inside. And based on the temperature, Osun woke up, started dancing around, fell over. Orula saw what was going on. Osun was like, "They're trying to burn us alive." They grabbed Osun and he jumped out, you know, and was able to escape with his life. So it's one of the versions of Ifa where Osun, specifically the Lukumi Osun, lived inside of the house next to Orumila. Because people ask me, I actually had this situation recently at the store where they were like, "Baba, where do we put Osun?" And I said, well, Irete Lasun says wherever Orumila is, Osun should be. But you have some houses who say, hey, he needs to live next to the warrior collective. And where that comes from is in the Odu of Ogun Narosun, where Osun was the protector of Obatala's house, and he actually lived outside on the front patio. And the reason being is because he was the watchman of Obatala's prized white goat. So Obatala would come and go. He was a traveling man for work, and Osun would stay and watch the property. This concept of Osun being the watchman is also in the Odu of Oyekun Pakuche, where he would watch over the cemeteries of the valleys of the kings in Egypt, ironically. And I'm sure there's a manifestation in Yoruba land as well. And Osun was told in the Odu Ogun Narosun to not drink alcohol. But the warriors, Elegua Ogun Ochosi, went one day and said, you know, Osun, you're always working, man. Obatala's got you slaved out. Have a drink with us, bro. Like, you know, don't be like that. And he's like, no, Rula told me not to drink. You know, I got a job to do. I'm really not a fan of alcohol. And, you know, they started, you know, peer pressuring him, and Osun started drinking. What he didn't realize was he was the only one that was drinking, and they were just feeding him alcohol. He passed out drunk. They took the goat. They ate the goat, and then they left the extra, or the entrails, next to Osun's body, and they smeared the blood on his lips, right? Like a bagel. And, you know, when Obatala got home, you know, Osun had no way of defending himself. He's like, I didn't kill your goat. Well, he's like, the blood's on your lips and the guts are next to you. He was like, no, the last thing I remember was Elegua Ogun Ochosi. They were giving me a drink. And he's like, I told you not to drink. And when Osun looked to the right, he saw Elegua Ogun Ochosi running to the other land. So they got away with it. So Obatala punished him and said, I never want you in the house again. And now you live out front. And you're not allowed to sleep, by the way. The interesting thing about it is there's two Osuns, right? In the Lukumi tradition, the reason everybody has Osun is because we didn't know if we were going to survive. And they wanted to make sure the secret stayed alive. So everybody with Orumela received Osun based on the Odu of Iretelasun. But the Osun that Ogun Narosun speaks more of, as well as the one we're going to talk about in Babai Rosun Meji, and even in the Odu of Irete Untedi as well, and Osakuleya, is the Opa Osun, which is the one that's actually confectioned for the Babalawos. So it's a tall staff, and you can see where the Lukumi one was born from this concept. It has the Akalama bull bird on top. Osun became a rooster in the Lukumi tradition in the Odu Okanamei, amongst others. And this Opa Osun actually doesn't go inside of the house. It goes at the Babalawo's front door. And the reason being is because the Opa Osun is a status symbol, and it goes in front of the Babalawo's door, one, so that people know that there's a Babalawo there if they ever need attention spiritually, and two, it's to actually ward off negativity, specifically the Iamio Shoronga, right? So Ogun Narosun speaks of why you might see Osun next to the warriors, but it's not ideal, but that's where it comes from. Also, the concept of him being flat on the ground translates to these next pieces of information. So, for example, if you look at the Odu of Irosun Meji, it's where they use the Opa Osun staff to be able to open the gates of Ife and things like that. That's why it goes outside of the Babalawo's home. But then, if you look at the Odu of Irete Untedi, it speaks of where Osun acquired the capability not only to defend Orumila's home from the Iami or the negativity such as the Ajogun, but also defend him from them. So in Irete Untedi and Osakuleya, there's the Pataki that speaks of the manifestation of the scarecrow. Not the one from the Wizard of Oz. The poor thing couldn't defend from nobody.
If I only had a brain.
I think it is interesting, though, because if you look at the Wizard of Oz, the apes that were attacking him, they had wings. And they were being sent by a witch.
Like harpies, right? Isn't that what it's supposed to be?
I don't know, yeah, but the wing aspect is the thing I make most emphasis on, because the Iami are birds. Yeah. Right? And they're witches, the Aje, the elders of the night. So in this sign, Orumila had a crop, right? Most people interpret it as corn. And the crows or the Iami were coming and eating his crops, and it was causing a lot of frustration in his home. He was losing money. You don't have the money, you're not bringing no money home. The wife's like, what are you doing out there all day? All these different things. So he was like, I got to figure this out because I'm not going to be able to feed my kids. So divinations performed. Irete Untedi or Osakuleya, depending on the Pataki, comes out. And Ifa tells him to perform sacrifice, right? Now, with the metal and materials that he utilizes in the Ebo, he actually confections the Opa Osung staff, right? And he plants it right in the middle of the field. So the next time the Iami came and they saw a bird that looked more menacing than them, they backed up. They retreated completely. And because of it, Orumila was able to preserve his crops, feed his family, and have happiness, peace, and tranquility. So people say, you know, Osung, right? Technically, the only people who are supposed to have the Opa Osung are the Babalawos, and it's supposed to live outside at the front door as a reiteration of the Pataki that we just mentioned, where it defended them against the Iami and the negativities and things like that. I actually have mine at the front door. So my neighbors kind of look at it and I was like, what's that? So when we think of a scarecrow, we think of like a Jeepers Creepers concept or the Wizard of Oz. The original scarecrow actually kind of looked like a crow, where the Akalama bull bird was so menacing that the crows were like, yo, we don't want no parts of that, right? So Osung can either go next to Orumila, which is where I usually recommend my hand of Ifa initiates to have them or have it. Sometimes, you know, for, you know, reasons of domicile and whatnot, you have to have them on the floor next to the warriors, which I'm not a huge fan of because the warriors actually really did Osung dirty. And then for all my Babalao brothers that have the Opa Osung or the Opa Rere, it goes outside at the front door to be able to protect your home. So we went over Elegua, Ogun, Ochosi, Osung. Obatala, right? Obatala always goes above all the other Orishas. But we're going to go over the one exception, and there may be more, but I haven't gotten to that part of the book. But Obatala has always been recognized based on his name, Obatala, which means the king that covers, amongst all the other translations that could come from that. He's always been on top of the chinero, or on top of the, you know, the stand or bookcase where we put you know, the Orishas. You know, I remember my aunt's house in New York. She had a beautiful... The chinero was like this like wooden thing, Phil, that had like wooden doors with the glass, and they would keep like the fine porcelain and things like that on display.
Oh, okay.
You
like
know, in that one room we were never allowed to eat in. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So Obatala has always been above everybody. And the reason being is it kind of goes back to the Odu of Eyobe, where he was the first Orisha to descend. And, you know, when you look at the characteristics of his name, Orishanla, it means Orisha has arrived, making reference to him being the first Orisha, the father Orisha. You go back to the Odu of Eyobe, the act of prostration and homage to one's parents. All of the Orishas throw themselves to Obatala, basically. So it was always understood he should be above everybody anyway. He kind of manifested with the clouds, the mountaintops, all of those different things. And he's always kind of been retired from the other Orishas, where if you look at the various pieces of literature, to be able to go see Obatala, specifically in his form of Osagninyang, as it's pronounced in the Lukumi, they would have to go up the mountain and kind of go visit dad, right? But there is an Odu known as Irosunsa, right? And in the Odu of Irosunsa was where the person was experiencing phenomenon, like, you know, and they really didn't understand why. You know, they did everything correctly. Their Orishas were where they needed to be, etc. But things were going left. And they went for divination. Irosun Susu was revealed, where Ifa said they needed to make sacrifice to the Orisha Oshun. And when they did, you know, they kind of explained their dilemma, and Oshun said, I'm the one causing you all of the issues. And they said, well, why are you doing this? And she said, well, I don't understand how I'm the Orisha that gives you more than everybody else, and I have to go below Batala. And they were like, well, this is what's been stipulated, you know, like he goes on top. And she said, well, I make the rules here. So if you want to be happy and have a marriage and money and all these different things, I need to go above everybody. Now, mind you, you know, Batala was like, yo, I have my position. How dare you? I'm your father. And she said, all right. And, you know, she kept cursing him and cursing him and cursing him to the point where he looked at Obatala and he's like, yo, you got to go. So he dropped Obatala down one level and he put Oshun on top, right? That's why in the Odu Irosunsa it says, Ochun ba arriba por encima de todo mundo. She goes above everybody. So it's one of those few cases where it can differ, right? And then, you know, specifically with the Obatala concept, you have Orishas like Odudua, right? That's an Orisha that can go as high, if not higher, than Obatala. Because recall that in the Odu of Eyobe, based on Obatala's actions, he ended up losing the title of Olofin Aye, or the governor of earth, right? So it's one of the pieces of information that legitimizes where Odudua can go as high, if not higher, than Obatala as well. He's kind of above everybody, you know? And then you also have energies like Ori. You know, Ori can go that high as well. Obatala is synonymous with the head, you know, and then Ori is literally the extension of Olodumare on earth. It's above everything. So I don't know how many shelves people have. I mean, they can all kind of go up there together depending on your Odu and things like that. But you can't go wrong. But technically, of all the Orishas, the one that actually should go the highest, or the deity that should go the highest, is Ori, because it represents Olodumare in our life entirely. So you're going to see all those different exceptions and whatnot. And this is really more of a Lukumi issue because, you know, when I've seen the shrines from the Sheshe brothers and sisters, you know, a lot of them have them living on mats, right, on the eteras and things like that, where there's really no deviation as far as, you know, stature or height. You know, they're kind of all equal, you know, on a plain surface. So this is more, you know, Lukumi stuff. But Obatala definitely inside of the home. You know, you want them in a space where it's very hygienic spiritually. Ideally, if the person has the opportunity and means, because it is a luxury, you should have a space just for your Orishas, whether it's a room, whether it's an office, things like that. A place that's somewhat solemn, a place of meditation, a place of re-encounter so that you can, you know, create that energy of peacefulness there. You know, a lot of people cover Obatala with a white cloth as well, which is perfectly fine. Odudua has the same concept. Ori has this same concept as well. If they're all kind of going to, you know, share space and whatnot, depending on what the person has received. But they kind of all have those same conditions and prerequisites. But definitely Obatala is an Orisha that goes in the home and most of the time goes above all the other Orishas in conjunction with things like Ori and Odudua. Right? So the other Orishas that are more commonplace, I mean, Oya is another one that should go in the house, right? Oshun as well, Yemaya as well. How you have them leveled up, though, is completely based on you. You have some people who still use the Chinero concept based on, you know, their conditions. Other people place their Orishas on pedestals, specifically with the soperas. All of those are fine. I mean, you have Odus like Odiche that says, you know, what you do for Ochung, you do for Yemaya. So, you know, they'll usually have them kind of level or next to each other. But also Odus like Odisan or Sadi say that, you know, what you do for Oya, you should do for Yemaya. So you might see in a house where that Odu dominates something closer to that, right? But then we have Orishas like Shango, right?
Uh-oh.
Shango is an interesting concept because ideally, first and foremost, you'd think, wow, Shango, king of the religion, he should go inside. But I have seen a lot of Isheshe brothers and sisters have their Shango shrine outside. Now, not outside in the sense of like the warriors, but a shed almost, or like a space similar where Shango, you know, basically is able to kind of manifest from a natural standpoint. When we look at the Odu of Babao di Meji as well as the Odu of Irete Oba, it shows a different side of Shango where Shango was really an outdoorsman. And he lived outside, you know, when he wasn't in the palace. You know, in Odimei, it was actually, well, in both of the Odus actually, because in the Odu of Odimei was where Bawaluaye actually killed his brother Inle, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the reason he did that is because he was very jealous of Inle, always making children smile or be happy. You know, Inle is seen as an Orisha of happiness, specifically with children, right? And Bawaluaye is seen as actually the deity that causes children to cry. I actually was reading some information last night where Bawaluaye is actually the Orisha that causes the pains of pregnancy, whether it's morning sickness, contractions, all of these different things.
Oh, really?
You know, and even though they are necessary, you know, based on maintaining the organism that is the woman, they are very uncomfortable. So in that Odu, Shango actually confronted Bawaluaye in the jungle when he found out that he killed their brother Inle for no reason. So it's an example where Shango lived outside. And then in the Odu of Irete Oba, or Irete Obara, after Bawaluaye had inflicted a disease upon his sister Dada, Agayu kicked Bawaluaye out of the house, and they ran into each other, Shango and Bawaluaye, in the jungle, where, you know, Eshu revealed once again to Shango that, he had inflicted his sister with a disease. And Shango beat him up, and was another example when Shango was actually outside. But, when we talk about the Lukumi side, deities like Obatala, Oshun, Yemaya, Oya, the more conventional ones, you see them in more like the porcelain sopera concept, right? But Shango is really affiliated with wood. Like in the Odio Bokanabara, he was associated with the wood of Ceiba, and there's another one called Akana, right? So most of his implements are in wood, specifically with the Odo concept, or the mortar and pistol. But Shango, there are people who have their Shango shrine outside, specifically from an Isheshe standpoint. So if you ever see that, don't be too taken aback, especially if you're not from that tradition, because it's just a different way of manifesting it. But there's plenty of Odus where Shango actually lived outside. And then, based on those patakis, deities like Bawaluaye, right? In my humble opinion, deities like San Lázaro, Azowano, or Obaluaye, Bawaluaye, they live outside. And the reason being is because I haven't seen a pataki where Bawaluaye lived within the house in a peaceful fashion. Like, for example, in the Odio Baba Iobe, there's a verse or a story that speaks of when Bawaluaye lived on the path, right? And he actually lined up the path with dead animals to keep death from going into the house, right? So it actually speaks of him defending the house from outside, mind you. Apart from that, you look at a concept like Bawaluaye of leprosy and all these different things. He is ultimately disease incarnate, not necessarily something that you want within the home permeating, right? And it was because of it, whether it was Odus like Iretekana, where, he had an entanglement and he caught leprosy and was kicked out of the village. There's not one story where he doesn't ultimately get kicked out of anywhere. Have you ever seen the movie Kingdom of Heaven, Phil?
That was with Orlando Bloom.
It was Orlando Bloom, yeah, and Edward Norton.
I don't remember it, but I think I probably did.
Yeah, there's actually, it's crazy that we're talking about this with Bawaluaye and how he was really shunned out of the home because of his affliction. Like even in the Odio Baba Ogundameji, it speaks of when Bawaluaye came into the house and got his godfather sick, and because of it, his godfather died. I've been actually watching a lot of clips. I haven't had the opportunity or the time to sit down and watch the full movie, but Kingdom of Heaven is based on the Crusades and Jerusalem and, the recapturing it of things like that. But the king of Jerusalem, his name was Baldwin IV.
Okay.
And really interesting guy, sad story. He contracted leprosy between the ages, I think, of 13 to 15, right? Around the same time that I believe he actually became king. So in history, he's known as the Leper King. And over the next 10 years, his condition got progressively, if not drastically, worse. I mean, they say that this gentleman was able to actually ride a horse, directing it with just his legs. Because one of the characteristics of leprosy is you lose the sensation in your extremities, right? But it made me really think about Bawaluaye, because this guy lived this wild life and was unfortunately, he died by the age of 24. But, when you watch the movie and you see how they depict him and things like that, or even read accounts of him, it reminded me a lot of Bawaluaye because, with the condition and things that he had, it only made medical sense for him to be isolated, to not, infect anybody else. But needless to say, sad as well. But when you see those real world parallels within history and our mythology, it always has interested me. So it's definitely something I'm going to be watching and I recommend.
So Kingdom of Heaven. So 2004.
2004, 2005. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, when it speaks of when, I believe the Sultan Salah ad-Din was trying to recapture Jerusalem and, Baldwin defended it. But I think one of the most interesting parallels within that movie is the respect that these two leaders had for each other, where they understood that war was a means to an end. It wasn't so emotional, at least the way it's cinematically depicted. But, going back to Bawaluaye, there's not one pataki that you read about him where he's not outside. And with that, his family as well, whether it's Nana, Nanu, Afra. In Yoruba land, when you talk about the Bawaluaye priest or the Obaluaye priest, they have Obaluaye almost in what I've seen like this mudden shrine shed type thing where it's like a little mud house. And, you know, I have read Pataki where he actually would rub the mud on his skin and things like that for the alleviation. So maybe that's why that material is used, like the clay and things like that. But he lives outside, you know, and when you want to go visit him, he's outside. So for all of those that have received San Lázaro, Babaluaye, Azohano, whatever you want to call him, you know, the various Pataki that we've cited up until this point all make reference to him living outside. So by nature, the Odu Ireteyero says that the Ifa Orisha practitioner is going to have sheds, right? Or outside manifestations of residency for their Orishas, because not all of them should ideally be within the home. And you see similar concepts where, you know, a lot of the old school, you know, tatas and yayas and things like that, the prenda was always outside, you know, which is their central icon. So it's very similar things. It's not that they're necessarily negative, but they are overstimulating. Like, for example, people ask me, you know, Baba, where can I put the bóveda? Or they'll ask Poroye. And, you know, her answer is like, you know, the Orishas need their space just like you need your space. So she'll coach somebody and they'll be like, you know, I'm having this phenomenon. I can't sleep. I'm seeing things in my room. Oh, where's your bóveda? Oh, it's right next to my bed. Or it's in my closet in my room. You know, it's basically a portal or a doorway where things can come in and out. So you want to have them in their own space so that you can have a quality of life as well, because, you know, we're only santeros, you know, we're babalaos and santeros 24 hours of the day, but that doesn't mean we're stimulating it all day long either. So for Babaluaye as well as the bóveda. And that leads us into the next Orisha as well, somebody like Egungun, right? Where does Egungun go? Or where does the Teja go? So in Nigeria, you know, since, you know, its inception, the Egungun shrine has always been outside, being that the Egungun, or the actual bones of our ancestors, were buried in our backyard. So over there, the dirt is reddish clay, whatnot. And, you know, you would have your ancestors buried in a central space, somewhat like a mausoleum, right? And, you know, you would go out there and make your offerings and whatnot. So it was very straight to the point. Like, you don't bury the dead within the house, you know? Yeah. They go to their house, you go to yours. You know, there's always that separation, but we always commune on common ground. What happened is when Ifa migrates from Africa to Cuba and ultimately the rest of the New World, but specifically Cuba initially, we didn't have that luxury. Stripped from a homeland, couldn't go to the cemetery for certain spiritual things because Ifa was so frowned upon. So what they innovated, like the geniuses they were, is they took the same material, or the clay where Egung ultimately gets absorbed into, and took the terracotta tile, right? And utilized that for their Egungun worship. But being that people didn't have patios and things like that, especially in Havana, where it was more like a tenement concept in the solares, the tile lived in the bathroom a lot of the time, or under a cabinet in the kitchen. And the reason being that they would gravitate more towards that is because the Odu Ogun Nafung says that, you know, there's spiritualities that live in pipes and things like that. So they would have it close to the drain or the bathroom, because it's an ideal place for Egung to be able to manifest, because it's dark, it's a little moist, you know, it's more conducive, right? So originally you'd walk into like an old Cuban house and stuff like that. You know, they'd have the teja in like a cabinet under the kitchen, you know, or sometimes you see it in the bathroom, like in its own cabinet and things like that, because of these concepts.
So what about if you have like animals and you put it outside and, like, you know, you get a raccoon or a cat or
that
something
happens.
Like that messes with your
that does happen. Like, I had a guy one time, the poor thing, he put his Egungun shrine outside, and I think a coyote came and thought it was a chew toy and completely ate up the Egungun, you know. So he called me, he's like, Padrino. I said, don't worry, we'll replace it. You know, everything's replaceable. Thank God no one dies here, you know. So, but yeah, it happens. You know, all you have to do is get it replaced, you know, and you're like, oh, but that was the one. Well, if that was the case, the religion would have died in the diaspora, because, you know, contrary to popular belief, you know, our ancestors weren't able to bring anything over. I mean, if you're talking about, you know, a transculturation, you know, it's not that people come and they enslave us and they're like, hey, pick up your belongings and make sure you have them with you for the ride. They were like, nah, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, we got yanked up and they took us.
I got it. So it's not like taboo or anything.
No, it happens. It happens, you know. People have tragedies, you know, and I tell this to everybody watching as well. Please do not leave candles unattended to. You know, just because they're used for spiritual purpose doesn't mean they're any less deadly when they're unsupervised. I know a guy, you know, luckily his family wasn't harmed, but a candle burned down half of his house, you know. And, yeah, some of the Orishas, you know, went with it, you know. So, yeah, we replace everything, and, yeah, we keep it trucking. You know, the spirituality and the ceremony's done. We're just replacing material at that point, but process has already been solidified. So now that we're in a position where, you know, people might have more means or they're coming back and we're reincorporating things as well, you know, the Egungun icon ideally lives outside in touch with the ground, right? Now, you have some people who have it living in the garage and things like that. That's fine, because technically that's an addition. But ideally, Egungun should be touching the ground. And it's so indicative because when you look at how the teja manifested in Lukumi, where you have your tile, you have your baton de Egun or muerto, and you draw your circle with the 9 lines and things like that, all of that is mitigated and semi-unnecessary once you have the Egungun icon on the ground. Because the reason we have to mark the lines and things like that when it's on concrete is because the earth is not able to mitigate Egungun's influence at that point. So we have to draw the half circle line with the 9 lines that represents Egungun, which are the 9 sons of Oya, so that they know that that's their space and on the other side is ours. That's why you'll notice for the people that still have the Egungun, the tile, which is legitimate and effective, the offerings are always placed or should be placed inside of the circle, you know, for them to consume. If you have your Egungun outside on the ground or in a clay plate on the dirt, there's no reason to draw any of these things because the, you know, Ileogere or the earth handles all that, you know. But Egungun goes outside, you know, and mind you, when you look at even the story of Obewenye, right, where Egungun, you know, went onto the compound, better said, because a lot of people look at that story, but well, Egungun went into the house. Now, this is true. You will see sometimes people have their Egungun masquerade concepts and costumes and things like that within the property, but it usually has its own space as well, kind of similar to a Bawaluaye concept or whatnot. But the Isang Egungun ideally should be on the ground outside because it's commemorative of a tree. You know, when we look at the Odu of Obeyono, the trees were our ancestors. And the way they would get their nourishment through the reincarnation process was through us burying ourselves in the dirt and then the nutrients being sucked up by the roots. So the same way Egungun is made out of wood, it should be a reiteration of that. Yeah.
Well, guess what?
It's the time.
It's that time again. That's right. Time to show love to the people who show love to the channel.
Yeah.
Right, guys. So it's real simple. There's a little button right under that video. Just click on join. Takes you to our membership platform. We got around 240 members. I just counted each individual one. But we got several different tiers, each tier offering its own different perks. Whether it's extra episodes or releases to the podcast, discounts on merch or classes, you name it. All right, so I think today we're going to do some premium super fans.
Nice.
All right, you ready?
Absolutely.
All right, we got Adriana Mercado.
Awesome, Adriana. Thank you.
We got Tony Williams.
Premium.
We got Tamara Lopez.
Oh, yeah.
We got Mark K.
Thank you.
Sean Taylor.
Okay.
Nicole Mendez.
Mm-hmm.
Beatrice Torres.
Hello, Beatrice.
And Shonda Williams.
Guys, thank you so much. You're the best part of the channel. If you know somebody that can benefit from the membership program, be sure to let them know. I want to mention our sponsors. Luna Hall and Studio is renting right now. Be sure to look into it. Ifa Orisha event spaces as well. If you need a safe, nice place to be able to perform ceremony, they're an option for sure. Trim Precision Mobile Detailing is still making people's cars look great. Be sure to reach out to those brothers. BotanicaCandlesandMore.com is up and running for all your service and product needs. We do ship. Be sure to check out the podcast on any of the apps, Apple, iHeartRadio, Spotify. If you can't catch us on video here in YouTube, Guys, like, comment, share, subscribe. A big thank you from all of us here at Our Roots Podcast. And until next time, you know what it is. See the light.
Baba Joseph showed the path today. Baba knows the way, we follow the signs. He walks with the Orisha through sacred lines. He speaks with the ancients, he honors the drum. He carries the wisdom where we all come from.